They say the library lights still turn on after midnight. Not for ghosts, but for those who can't find rest. The ones still searching for a gentle ending. When the world outside grows too loud and the mind keeps whispering questions that have no answers, this place waits. Quiet, patient, breathing softly in the dark. Each lamp glows like a heartbeat. Each book hums with stories that never rush to be told. The air smells of rain and old paper, a promise that time moves slower here, that nothing will chase you. You can leave your worries by the door. No one will ask where you've been or why sleep has forgotten your name. Just sit by the window, listen to the turning pages, and let the soft light guide you inward to that still secret place where peace has been waiting all along. The town of Belmere always grew quiet before nightfall, as if it exhaled at the end of each day. After the rain, the air carried the faint sweetness of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Streets glistened under the dim amber light of the old iron lamps, and the shop windows reflected the last blush of the sun. Soft pink melting into gold, then fading into the gentle gray of evening. Eleanor Hart walked slowly down Main Street, her scarf tucked neatly beneath her coat, a paper bag cradled in her arms. Inside were the small comforts she'd promised herself: a box of chamomile tea, a jar of honey, and a paperback novel she already knew she would never finish. She smiled faintly at the thought, not out of sadness but out of habit. It was something her husband used to tease her about. "You love beginnings," he would say, "but you never care how things end." The bells of St. Matthew's Church chimed 6 times, their notes floating through the mist like silver threads. Somewhere, a window shutter closed with a soft thud. A cat darted across the street, its paws making no sound on the wet stone. Eleanor adjusted her grip on the bag and looked up at the rows of narrow houses, their windows glowing softly behind sheer curtains, like distant lanterns in a dream. Each held a family, a life unfolding behind glass. She imagined laughter over dinner, a kettle singing, the small warmth of belonging. For a moment, she felt like an onlooker at the edge of a painting, watching but never stepping inside. The air was cold enough to make her breath visible. She liked watching it fade. Proof that she was still here, still breathing, even if the house waiting for her was too quiet. At the corner, she paused beneath a flickering streetlight. Across the way stood the old library, its doors long closed for the night. Its tall windows were fogged from within, catching the last glimmers of twilight. Eleanor had always loved that building, not for its books, but for its stillness. When she was younger, she'd often sit by the back window with her husband, reading in silence until the custodian asked them to leave. It was there she had learned that silence between two people could feel full, almost like music. Now, silence was something else entirely. The rain had left small puddles along the cobblestone path, reflecting the lamps like scattered pieces of amber glass. As she walked, her footsteps echoed softly, matching the steady rhythm of her thoughts. 3 years, she reminded herself. 3 years since Arthur had gone. She no longer cried when she said his name aloud, but sometimes she spoke to him in her sleep. The kind of dreams that linger after waking, leaving a quiet ache she could neither name nor release. Her house waited at the far end of Willow Lane, half hidden by an overgrown maple tree. Its windows were misted, the porch light dim. When she unlocked the door, the familiar scent greeted her. Lavender soap, old books, and a faint trace of the cedar cologne Arthur used to wear. She didn't turn on the overhead light. Instead, she lit a single lamp by the armchair, the one with the faded green shade. The glow spread softly, touching the spines of books, the framed photographs on the mantel, the porcelain teacup beside her reading chair. It was enough. She unpacked her groceries with careful hands, placed the tea on the counter, and set the book on the table. The title shimmered faintly under the light. The Sea Between Us. She smiled at that too. It sounded like something Arthur would have chosen. Outside, the rain began again, a slow, whispering drizzle that tapped gently against the window. Eleanor sank into the armchair and listened. The sound was steady, patient, like a hand brushing against glass. She opened the book, read the first few lines, and felt the familiar stillness settle in her chest. She didn't expect to finish the story. She only wanted to sit with it. The way one sits beside a memory, not to relive it, but to let it breathe. In the quiet, the world seemed to hum, low and soft, as if the night itself were singing her to rest. It was past midnight when Eleanor woke, though she couldn't remember what had stirred her. The house was still, wrapped in the kind of silence that feels almost alive, a hush so deep it carried its own weight. The rain had stopped, but the air held its memory. A faint dampness, the smell of earth and moss pressing through the open window. For a moment she lay listening, to the clock ticking softly in the hallway, to the faint creak of the roof settling after the storm. But something in her chest felt restless, a quiet flutter that refused to fade. She rose, wrapped her shawl over her nightdress, and lit her small lantern. The flame bloomed gently, golden and steady. It wasn't unusual for her to take walks at night. The town at that hour was kinder, emptied of chatter and expectation. There was something soothing in the idea that the world was sleeping, and she could move through it unseen. Outside, fog clung to the ground like a living thing, swirling around her ankles as she stepped onto the lane. The air shimmered faintly, filled with the scent of wet leaves and stone. Her footsteps made almost no sound. The mist seemed to absorb everything: light, motion, even thought. She didn't plan where to go, but her feet carried her toward Main Street, past the shuttered bakery and the row of darkened shops. The lamps along the street burned dim and flickering, their halos soft against the fog. Then she saw it. At the far end of the square, beyond the iron gate and the crooked oak, a light glowed where there should have been none. The library. It stood at the edge of the fog, silent and skeletal, its windows long blackened by the fire that had closed it years ago. No one had entered since. The roof had been partly rebuilt, the steps cordoned off, yet now a faint golden pulse spilled from within. Not bright, but steady, like a candle burning behind old glass. Eleanor stopped, her breath clouding in the cold. She blinked once, twice. The light did not vanish. A quiet hum lingered in the air, low, almost imperceptible, like the vibration of distant music. Moths circled the light, their wings shimmering silver as they brushed the windowpane. The sight was oddly beautiful, though it stirred something uneasy inside her. Not fear exactly, but the delicate tremor that comes when memory brushes against mystery. Her heart began to beat faster. The sensible thing would have been to turn back, to tell herself it was nothing more than reflection, a trick of the fog. But there was something familiar about the glow. It wasn't harsh or cold, it was warm, gentle, almost like the light that had filled her home when Arthur used to read by the fire. Before she realized it, she had crossed the square. Her shoes brushed softly over fallen leaves, her lantern swaying in rhythm with her steps. The air grew thicker the closer she came, the hum deepening, wrapping around her like a whisper just beyond comprehension. The library loomed above her now, its stone steps glistening with dew. The carved oak doors stood where they always had, marked by time, edges darkened with soot. She could see her reflection in the glass, pale, uncertain, wrapped in shawl and shadow. For a long moment she hesitated. Her fingers hovered just above the handle. Then, without warning, a soft click broke the stillness. The sound was so gentle it almost blended with the fog, but it was unmistakable. The lock had turned on its own. Eleanor froze. Her heart stuttered once, then steadied. The door eased open a fraction as though breathing out. Warm air drifted through the gap, faintly scented with old paper and cedar, a scent she hadn't known in years. The light inside wavered, as if beckoning her forward. She should have been afraid, yet instead she felt something else. A strange, quiet knowing. The kind of pull you feel when you dream of someone you've lost, and for one fleeting second, believe they're still waiting for you. The lantern in her hand flickered once. She tightened her grip, and then slowly she stepped through the fog and into the light. The air inside the library was warmer than she remembered. Not stifling, but close, like the breath of a long-forgotten memory. The door closed softly behind her. the sound cushioned by the thick air and the heavy scent of dust and cedar. Her lantern's light seemed unnecessary. The room already glowed with its own quiet warmth. Lamps hung from the high ceiling, their glass shades ambered with age. The light they cast was steady and golden, filling the room with the kind of calm one might find at the end of a prayer. For a long while, Eleanor stood still, listening. No footsteps, no wind, not even the groan of wood that old buildings often make when left to themselves. Just a deep, living silence, the kind that presses gently against your chest, asking you to breathe slower, to listen deeper. She took a few steps forward. Her shoes made the faintest whisper on the wooden floor, each step stirring tiny clouds of dust that glittered in the lamplight. Shelves loomed on both sides, tall and familiar, though the books were fewer now. Many spines were blank, their titles lost to time. Others sat open, their pages curled like old leaves. And yet, despite the ruin, everything was clean. Not untouched, but cared for, as if someone had been tending to it quietly without being seen. Eleanor's heart gave a small, confused ache. Her eyes drifted toward the long reading table near the center of the room. There, beneath a pool of warm light, lay a single book. No stack of others, no scattered papers. Just one. Its cover was plain, deep brown leather unmarked by title or author. The edges of the pages were gilded faintly, the gold worn to dull shimmer. Something in her chest tightened. It was strange, but the sight of it, so lonely, so deliberate, made her feel as though she were being expected. She moved closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the table. The wood was warm beneath her skin, as if someone had just been there. She looked around again, half hoping, half dreading, to see a librarian behind the counter, or perhaps another late-night wanderer. But there was no one. Only the faint hum of the lamps and the slow beating of her own heart. She opened the book. The paper sighed softly, brittle but alive. The first few pages were blank. She turned them carefully, the rustle echoing faintly in the stillness. Then, faint lines appeared, not printed but written in ink, the strokes thin and deliberate, as though the writer had been afraid of breaking the silence. At first the words were simple. Fragments of poems she couldn't place. Descriptions of rain, of tea, of someone waiting by a window. The handwriting was graceful, elegant, old-fashioned, but as she turned the pages, her breath caught. The writing began to change. The letters, their slant, the spacing, they were hers. Her own handwriting. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She leaned closer, tracing a fingertip over the ink. It wasn't just similar, it was exact. She remembered that curve of the E, the loop of the R. This was her hand. The hand she'd had decades ago before arthritis and time had stiffened her fingers. The realization sent a ripple through her chest. Not fear, not yet, but the quiet unease of something impossible that feels too intimate to reject. Her lips parted as she turned to the last page. There, centered in the middle of the parchment, was a short message, written neatly in the same familiar script. You are not alone when you read. The lantern trembled slightly in her hand. The words seemed to hum against the page as though alive with breath she could not see. She read them again, and again. A warmth bloomed in her throat. Not comfort exactly, but something heavier, deeper. The ache of recognition. She remembered, years ago when Arthur was still alive, she used to leave little notes for him inside his books. Just small things. You'll love this one. Or, page 1 to 12 made me cry. She had always written them in her neatest hand, so he would know it was her, even when she wasn't home. Her knees weakened. She lowered herself into the chair beside the desk, clutching the book to her chest. The library was silent still, but it no longer felt empty. The air seemed to breathe around her, gentle, protective, aware. Outside, the fog pressed softly against the windows, blurring the lamplight into halos of gold. Eleanor sat for a long while, tracing the cover of the book with her thumb, trying to steady the rhythm of her heart. There was fear, yes, a tender, uncertain fear. But beneath it lay something else, a strange, wordless comfort. As if the library itself had whispered to her through the pages, that memory once written never truly disappears. That love once shared still turns its own light on, quietly, patiently, waiting to be read again. Eleanor didn't plan to return the next night. She told herself it was only curiosity, an innocent pull toward something unfinished. But all day, as she brewed her tea or folded her laundry, her mind wandered back to that line. You are not alone when you read. By dusk, she found herself standing once more at the edge of the fog, lantern in hand. The town was quieter than usual. Even the usual clatter from the diner had softened into stillness. Above, a half-moon hung low, pale as old parchment. The library waited at the end of Main Street, exactly as she'd left it, silent yet somehow expectant. As she approached, the lamps along the walkway flickered on, one by one, as though sensing her steps. Not harshly, but with a slow, tender rhythm, a soft inhalation and exhalation like the breathing of something vast and gentle. When she pushed open the door, the warm air embraced her again, richer this time, scented faintly with candle wax and something floral like pressed violets. The moment she stepped inside, she knew something had changed. The shelves that had once been half empty now brimmed with books, not new, but ancient. Spines worn, leather soft and cracked. Dust floated through the lamplight, yet the room itself felt alive. The light shifted in slow waves, brushing the walls with a living warmth. She moved deeper, drawn by a soft hum that pulsed at the edge of hearing. It wasn't mechanical, more like the murmur of voices just behind the veil of silence. On the long reading table where the single brown book had once rested, there were now several neatly stacked, each open to a page that seemed to glow faintly beneath the lamps. Her throat tightened. She leaned over the first one. Its paper smelled faintly of rain and ink. Across the top, in faint handwriting, she read, "I wanted to be a teacher once before I lost my voice." Her pulse quickened. Those words, they were hers. A sentence she had written in her journal decades ago after a bad winter illness had taken her singing voice. She turned to another book. He used to read poetry out loud. Said it made the house feel less empty. She knew that one too. It was from a letter she'd written to a friend years after Arthur's passing. She lifted her eyes, scanning the room. The hum deepened slightly, as if acknowledging her discovery. The lamps flickered again, and their light seemed to bend, not chaotically, but with purpose, flowing like a gentle current through the air. More books. She moved from table to shelf, finding her own words, her own handwriting. Fragments of poems, dreams, even half-remembered thoughts she was certain she'd never written down. I miss the sound of him turning pages. Some nights I dream we are young again, walking home in the rain. If love has a shape, it must be light. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. It was impossible. And yet there it was, spread before her like a map of her own soul. For the first time in years, she spoke aloud, her voice small but steady. Who's doing this? The silence that followed was not empty. It listened. A soft draft brushed her cheek, warm, fragrant, like someone had exhaled close beside her. The pages of the nearest book fluttered, though no window was open. On the table, one volume lay unopened. Its cover was pale blue, the kind she used to buy for her journals. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she lifted it. Inside, written in neat, familiar script, were only 4 words. Come back tomorrow night. Eleanor froze. Her breath caught halfway between fear and wonder. The ink looked fresh. The lamps brightened, just a touch, like a heartbeat quickening in excitement. She closed the book gently, clutching it to her chest. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, swirling in pale ribbons that looked almost alive. Somewhere in the distance, the clock tower struck midnight, each chime soft and low, resonating through the still air like a slow, steady pulse. Eleanor turned toward the door, but before leaving, she glanced once more at the rows of flickering lights. They seemed to bow slightly, as though nodding in approval, as though the library had not only remembered her, but was waiting. She whispered into the quiet, "I'll come back." And when she stepped outside, the door closed itself behind her, gently, like a promise kept. The following night, Eleanor came earlier, before the fog had fully gathered. She told herself it was only to see the place again, to understand how it worked, though some deeper part of her already knew understanding was not what the library wanted from her. The door opened before she could touch it. Inside, the light was softer tonight, dimmer but warmer. As if the library had lowered its voice to a whisper, the air pulsed faintly, in rhythm with her breath. She wandered past the shelves she now half expected to shift when she wasn't looking. Books rustled softly as she passed, their pages stirring though the air was still. The sound was faint, like whispers between friends who didn't wish to wake a sleeping child. She reached the far corner of the library where a tapestry hung, a faded scene of a river running through a forest. It had never caught her eye before, but now the edges seemed freshly dusted, the fabric slightly lifted by a hidden current. Eleanor hesitated, then pulled the edge aside. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraled upward into the shadows, its banister worn smooth by time. She lifted her lantern and began to climb. The steps creaked beneath her weight, soft, familiar, almost polite. The air grew warmer with each turn, filled with the scent of old paper and lavender. At the top, a small landing opened into a round room she had never known existed. It was a reading room, quiet, circular, with shelves lining the curved walls from floor to ceiling. The lamps here glowed low, their light golden and steady. Dust hung in the air like glittering breath. In the center stood a long oak table, and upon it, dozens of journals lay open. Not arranged neatly this time, but scattered, as though someone had been reading them moments ago and left in a hurry. A clock hung above the far wall, its hands frozen at 12:03 a.m. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She checked her own watch at 12:03. A small tremor ran through her, but she stepped forward anyway. The journals were old, some bound in leather, others in faded fabric. Their spines bore no titles. She leaned over one, and the faint sound of whispering filled the room again. The same gentle murmur she'd heard from the shelves below. The pages rustled as she touched them, though no draft moved. Her fingers brushed a line of writing. It was her name. Not just her name. Eleanor Hart, written in the same elegant hand as before. She turned another page. The ink was darker here, newer, and the words seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. Tonight she will find the room upstairs. The clock will read 12:03. Her breath caught. She glanced up at the frozen hands on the clock, then back to the page. Her reflection trembled faintly in the glass cover of another book. Slowly she reached for the next journal. Tomorrow she will dream of her husband's laughter. It will sound real again. Her heart thudded softly, painfully. She ran her fingertips across the words, half expecting them to fade. But they remained, patient, solid. Another book lay open beside it, pages yellowed but the ink startlingly fresh. Soon she will understand that this library was never empty. It was waiting to remember her. The words blurred. She blinked hard, realizing her eyes had filled with tears. She turned toward the shelves that circled the room. Every book seemed to lean slightly toward her, their pages whispering faintly like leaves in wind. The sound wasn't frightening anymore, and it was almost soothing, like being read to as a child. Still, the sight of her own future written down, calm, inevitable, made her chest ache with both wonder and unease. She spoke softly into the golden air. "Who writes these?" The whispering stilled. A soft tick echoed from the clock, just one, though its hands did not move. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. The warmth in the room deepened, pressing close like a gentle embrace. It didn't feel malicious, only knowing. Her lantern flame flickered once, then steadied. She closed the nearest journal and slid it toward her. Its cover felt warm, almost alive, like a pulse beneath the leather. She hesitated, then opened to the last page. A new line was appearing, ink unfurling slowly as if written by an invisible hand. She reads these words now in the room where time has stopped. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. The ink shimmered, then faded into stillness. The silence that followed was soft but deep. A silence that seemed to hold her gently, like the pause between two heartbeats. And then from somewhere beyond the shelves came a sound. A low, familiar hum. The same tune Arthur used to whistle when he worked in the garden. It rose, fell, and then faded into the golden air. Her throat tightened. The ache in her chest melted into something bittersweet. For the first time since he'd passed, she felt not alone but seen, as if the universe had bent just slightly to show her that love had been writing her story all along. She looked up once more at the clock. The hands trembled, just barely, and for one fleeting second they moved. 12:04. Then the ticking stopped. The night had turned silver with fog, curling softly around the street lamps as Eleanor stepped out of the library. She clutched her shawl closer, feeling the warmth of her heartbeat against the cool mist. The town was silent again, that deep, tender kind of silence that feels alive. She turned once more toward the library door. The glass reflected only the amber light inside. Yet, there, between the shelves, something moved. A shadow. Slow, deliberate. Her breath caught. It wasn't threatening, not quite. There was a rhythm to the movement, a familiarity she couldn't name. The lamps inside flickered once, as though breathing in time with the figure. Eleanor froze at the threshold, her hand trembling slightly as the fog crept around her shoes. Then she heard it. A soft humming, distant at first, low and tuneful, as though echoing through time rather than space. It wound through the air like smoke, a melody almost too fragile to exist. Eleanor's throat tightened. She knew that tune. Her husband used to whistle it every morning while brewing tea. The same rise, the same quiet drop at the end of the phrase, as if he'd always been too gentle to finish it aloud. Her eyes blurred. "Arthur?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The humming paused. Then, from within the library's depths, one of the lamps brightened for just a heartbeat, and dimmed again. Eleanor took a step forward. "Arthur," she said again, her voice barely more than breath. Silence. Only the faint shuffle of pages as though invisible hands were closing a book. And then, one final note of the melody, softer this time, almost loving. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. The moment hung there, fragile, aching, and impossibly still. She felt no danger, only the weight of memory, the kind that warms and wounds in the same heartbeat. When she finally turned to walk home, the fog seemed to part for her, curling aside like a curtain. The tune lingered in the air behind her, each note fading into the hum of crickets. By the time she reached her gate, the night was silent once more. Yet as she stepped onto her porch, the wind brushed her cheek. Not cold, but gentle, as though someone unseen had reached out in kindness. Inside her home, the clock ticked softly. She set her tea to boil, her hands still trembling, and for a brief moment she could almost feel the warmth of another hand resting over hers. When she looked up at her reflection in the window, the mist outside shimmered faintly, and though she couldn't be sure, it seemed to shape itself into the outline of a man standing quietly by the lamplight, the same light that had never truly gone out. The next night, Eleanor returned to the library without meaning to. It was as though her footsteps had remembered the path before her mind did. The fog had thinned, and the air was heavy with that tender hush that follows a long rain. The brass handle of the door felt warm beneath her hand, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the lamps glowed as softly as candlelight beneath a veil. Dust drifted through the air like falling snow, catching in the golden beams. But something was different tonight. There was movement, a slow turn of a page that didn't belong to her. At the far table near the window where she'd first found the mysterious book sat an elderly man. His back was straight, his coat neatly pressed, and beside him lay a pair of worn leather gloves. The lamplight caught the rim of his glasses, hiding his eyes in a soft gleam. He didn't speak. Eleanor froze by the doorway. For a moment, all she heard was the faint crackle of the lamp and the whisper of paper. The sight should have startled her. No one was supposed to be here. Yet instead of fear, something else bloomed in her chest. Calm curiosity, like finding a familiar scent in a forgotten place. The man turned a page slowly, the motion deliberate, tender. Then, without lifting his head, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that carried warmth without sound. Patient, wordless, and entirely unthreatening. Eleanor stepped closer. "Good evening," she whispered. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her, but said nothing. His silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, as if he was listening, and not to her words, but to her being. She noticed the book before him. Its pages were thick, yellowed with time. No title on the cover, just like the one she had found before. But this one was open to the middle, where faint handwriting glowed under the lamp. She caught a glimpse of it, a line she almost recognized. "The quietest companionship is often the kind that heals." Eleanor's breath softened. She didn't ask who he was. Didn't ask how he had entered the locked library or why his presence felt so strangely right. Instead, she sat across from him. They read in silence. The only sounds were the gentle rasp of turning pages and the sigh of the wind outside. The old wooden clock ticked softly, though its hands had not moved for years. At one point, she looked up and caught him watching her. Not sharply, but with the tenderness of someone recognizing an old photograph. There was something achingly familiar in the tilt of his smile, something that stirred memory just beyond reach. Then, as if sensing her thought, he closed the book. The air shifted, and a subtle tremor, almost like a breath drawn in by the room itself. The lamplight flickered, and for a heartbeat, Eleanor thought she saw something impossible. A faint shimmer of light in the man's eyes, like the reflection of a candle in still water. Then it was gone. He stood, quietly placed the book back on the table, and nodded toward her. Not a goodbye. Something gentler. A promise. When Eleanor blinked, the space he had occupied was empty. Only the faint warmth of his chair remained, and beside it a folded scrap of paper. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "You read beautifully, Eleanor." Her breath caught. The handwriting, delicate, looping, was his. Arthur's. And though the night was long, for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The following evening, Eleanor lit a small lantern before leaving home. She wasn't sure why, and perhaps to guide her way through the thinning fog, or perhaps because she feared the light in the library might not appear again. But when she reached the building, its windows glowed softly, like a quiet heartbeat waiting in the dark. The door, as before, opened without resistance. Inside, the air was warm, carrying that familiar scent of rain-damp paper and cedar. And at the desk, the same one beneath the arched window, sat the man once more. His posture was straight but easy, as though he had never left at all. He glanced up, eyes gentle. "You came back." Eleanor smiled faintly, setting her lantern down. "I wasn't sure the library would let me." He chuckled softly. "It lets those who listen." He motioned to the chair across from him. A book rested between them, larger than the last, its spine deep green, the cover embossed with faint golden leaves. There was no title, only the quiet shimmer of age. Without speaking, they opened it together. At first, the pages held gentle sketches. A cottage garden, a teacup beside a windowsill, a woman in a red scarf standing beneath autumn trees. Then came words written in delicate ink, and Eleanor's pulse stilled as she read the opening line. "The day Arthur planted the wisteria tree, the wind carried laughter through the yard." Her breath caught. She remembered that day, the smell of soil, the way her husband had grumbled about the roots while secretly humming under his breath. It had been their first spring in the house. She could still see his hands brushing dirt from her cheek, still hear the sparrows chattering above them. But she had never written about it, never told anyone. The man beside her said nothing. His gaze stayed on the page, calm, patient. They turned another leaf. She brewed chamomile tea that evening, though neither of them drank it. They sat watching the light fade, waiting for the first star. Eleanor's hands trembled. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes. The handwriting wasn't hers, yet every detail was exact. The chipped rim of the cup, the faded tablecloth, the way Arthur had whispered something about forever sounding shorter than it should. How? She swallowed hard, voice breaking softly. How can it know? The man's expression didn't change. Perhaps stories remember what we forget, he said. Perhaps love leaves its own ink. Vitaste? They read on, pages of small, tender moments. The night she and Arthur danced in the kitchen after a storm. The day they fixed the leaky roof, laughing as rain poured down again minutes later. The final morning in the hospital, when she held his hand and whispered the same lullaby she'd once sung to their son. Each word felt like a key turning in a locked door inside her chest. Eleanor didn't notice her tears until one fell onto the paper, blurring a line of ink. The man reached out slowly, and without touching her, he nodded once. An acknowledgement, a silent understanding. The room was utterly still. Outside, the fog brushed against the windows like a soft wave. She closed the book gently. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice thin and trembling. The man's smile deepened, kind, sorrowful, and serene. Just someone who reads what others leave behind. She wanted to ask more, how he knew, what this place was, what it meant. But the words dissolved before reaching her lips. A moment later, she felt a warmth spread across the room. Gentle, enveloping, like the quiet embrace of sunlight through glass. She looked up. The chair across from her was empty. The book remained open, its pages fluttering softly as if stirred by a breath. Eleanor reached across the table and touched the wooden armrest he had occupied. It was still warm. A faint sound filled the silence, the whisper of a familiar tune drifting through the shelves. Arthur's tune. She sat there for a long time, one hand resting on the chair, the other on the open book. Between them, warmth lingered, real, impossible, and heartbreakingly kind. That night, when she walked home through the fog, she carried the green book close to her chest. And though the streets were empty, she didn't feel alone. Because somewhere, in the hush between the turning of pages, she could still hear him reading beside her. The fog was thicker that night, not heavy, but alive. It drifted through the streets in slow, curling ribbons, soft against Eleanor's cheeks as she walked. The lantern in her hand flickered, its flame bending as if in quiet anticipation. She didn't know why she kept returning to the library, only that some invisible thread tugged gently at her heart, guiding her through the mist. When she entered, the library greeted her like an old friend, still and warm, yet breathing. The lamps glowed softly, their halos trembling in the dusty air. Every visit felt different now, as though the building itself shifted in small, unseen ways to meet her where she stood. The desk where she and the man had read together waited, the green book resting open to the same page they had left. Eleanor sat down, tracing her fingers over the paper, feeling the indentation of words long written. For a long while, there was only silence. Then, a soft rustle like paper brushing against paper. A slip of parchment appeared on the table, though she hadn't seen from where. It was small, aged, the edges frayed and darkened as if it had survived a flame. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. In delicate, familiar handwriting, she read, "I still read with you." Her breath caught in her throat. The air seemed to hum faintly, a pulse running through the floorboards. She felt something stir deep within her chest. An ache both sharp and gentle, as though joy and grief had merged into one unbearable truth. "Arthur," she whispered. Her voice barely carried, but it was enough. The lamps flickered once, a tremor of light like a response. She smiled through tears. "You're still here, aren't you?" The note slipped from her fingers before she could stop it. It fell soundlessly onto the desk, and then it began to burn. No flame, no spark, just slow dissolution, curling into delicate gray ash that scattered across the table. The scent that rose from it was faint but unmistakable. Wood smoke and chamomile, the scent of the night everything had changed. The night of the fire? She could still see it even after all these years. The orange glow against the dark sky, the sound of cracking wood, the frantic pounding of her heart as smoke swallowed the air. She'd tried to reach him, tried to pull Arthur from the bedroom before the roof gave way. But by the time the firemen found her on the porch, she'd been holding only the book he'd been reading, the one that had somehow survived untouched. Now, the same smell filled the library. Faint, haunting, strangely tender. Tears streamed down her face. "You shouldn't have stayed," she whispered into the empty air. "You should have gone. You should have..." A gentle wind swept through the room, stirring the ashes. They rose, swirling like fine silver dust, dancing in the lamplight. And as she watched, the drifting particles began to shimmer. Not like smoke, but like stars suspended in water. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a hand among them. Not solid, but luminous, reaching toward her. The warmth that touched her cheek wasn't from the lamp. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face and wept, not from fear, but from the unbearable beauty of it. Because for the first time she no longer questioned what was real. She only knew what was true. When the ash finally settled, the room was still again. Only a faint mark remained on the desk, the shape of a heart traced in soot. Eleanor whispered into the quiet, "Then I'll keep reading too." Outside, the fog thinned. The first bird of dawn sang in the distance, gentle and uncertain, as if testing the new light. And in that tender space between night and morning, the library breathed, softly, like someone turning a page. That evening, the fog had grown pale and weightless, almost luminous, the kind of mist that seemed to hum with memory. Eleanor entered the library with quiet familiarity now, her fingers brushing the brass door handle like one might touch the arm of an old friend. The room breathed around her, soft and alive, the air carrying the faint perfume of rain and old parchment. Tonight she wandered deeper among the aisles where the lamps burned lower, and the books seemed to murmur to themselves. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, not only following a pull, the same invisible thread that had always led her exactly where she needed to be. But as she turned a corner, she stopped. There, at the very end of a narrow corridor she was certain hadn't existed before, stood a tall mirror. Its frame was carved from dark wood, twined with faded ivy patterns. The glass shimmered faintly, not with reflection, but with depth, like water seen under candlelight. Eleanor hesitated. She couldn't remember ever seeing a mirror here. The library had always been a place of books and silence, not vanity. And yet, something about it drew her closer. The air grew still as she approached. Each of her footsteps echoed slightly, as though the corridor stretched farther than it should. When she finally stood before the mirror, she let out a soft, startled breath. Her reflection wasn't quite her own, it was her, but younger. The woman in the mirror had the same gentle eyes, the same quiet grace, but her hair was darker, her skin less lined. She was seated at a table reading, the green book resting in her lap. Eleanor's pulse fluttered. The reflection's lips curved into a faint smile, calm and knowing. Then, without hesitation, the younger version turned a page. Eleanor hadn't moved. The sound of paper brushed through the air, faint but real. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly she raised her own hand, hesitated, and the reflection raised hers, a half-beat late, almost copying her. Almost. The mirror glowed softly, as if lit from within. For a moment, Eleanor thought she heard a voice, not from outside, but from behind the glass. A whisper. Familiar. "Keep reading, my love." Arthur's voice. She stepped back. "Arthur?" Her voice trembled. "Is that you?" No answer. Only her reflection, serene and silent. The younger Eleanor closed the book in her lap. Then she looked up, straight into the eyes of the older woman, and smiled. It was not eerie nor cruel. It was almost kind. But beneath that kindness lay something vast and unspoken, something like knowledge that stretched beyond the grave. The lamps behind her flickered once, dimmed, then steadied. Eleanor's breath came slowly now. Her fear was soft, more like reverence than terror. The sense that she stood before something sacred and unexplainable. The younger version lifted her hand again. This time, her palm pressed gently to the glass. Without thinking, Eleanor raised her own. The chill of the mirror met her skin, but beneath that chill there was warmth. And for a heartbeat, and only one, she felt the faint, pulsing rhythm of another heartbeat against her own. The sound of the clock from upstairs echoed faintly, 12:03 a.m. Then, in a shimmer of gold and shadow, the reflection vanished. Only her own face remained, older, tear-streaked, but calm. Eleanor stepped back, her body trembling. The corridor behind her had changed again. She could no longer see where it began. Only the mirror remained, the faint outline of two handprints still visible on its surface. One aged, one young. She whispered to the empty hall, "I'm still reading." And from somewhere deep within the library, a page turned on its own. The old clock above the reading room had not worked in years. At least that's what Eleanor had always believed. Its hands were frozen in eternal midnight, its brass pendulum stilled in the dust of decades. But tonight, as she sat beneath it with the half-open book trembling in her lap, the silence broke. Dong! Dong! Two hollow chimes rolled through the air, low and deliberate, echoing across the vastness of the library. Eleanor's heart stilled. The sound was impossibly clear, as though it came from deep within her chest rather than above her head. She turned her gaze upward. 12:03. The clock face glowed faintly, though no light touched it. A strange clarity fell over her. The air seemed thinner, edges sharper, time itself stretching like an elastic thread about to snap. She blinked. The second hand moved backward. Dong! Dong! Again. Two chimes, still. 12:03. Her pulse quickened. Books on the nearby shelf seemed to shift, their spines trembling like something breathing just out of sight. The whispering began again. Soft, overlapping voices murmuring words she couldn't make out. Words that might have been hers. "No," she whispered, standing up. "No, I'm not dreaming." Her reflection in the nearby mirror, the same one she'd found days ago, sat calmly at the reading table, still turning pages. Only now the reflection's lips moved. It was speaking soundlessly, a repetition of words she'd once said, years ago, in another life, beside another clock. Dong! Dong! The sound returned. Third time, same hour. Eleanor covered her ears, but the chime came from inside her head now, vibrating through her bones. The mirror rippled. The pages of her book fluttered open to the first chapter, one she hadn't written but remembered. At 12:03, time folds back on itself. The line read, "The one who listens may walk twice through their own story, once to live it, once to understand it." Her throat tightened. She stepped closer to the mirror. The younger version of herself stared back with eyes too knowing, too calm. The reflection lifted a hand, and so did Eleanor. Their palms met the glass. Warmth, not cold. Then came the smallest sound. A heartbeat, then another, in perfect sync with the ticking that resumed behind her. Tick, tock, tick, tock. When she turned, the library was subtly different. Books rearranged, dust gone. A candle flickered on the table, though she hadn't lit it. And somewhere above, the clock gave one last chime. Soft, almost apologetic. 12:04. The loop had ended, but in the mirror her reflection did not move. It only smiled, and faintly, knowingly. Before the glass clouded over like breath on winter air, Eleanor stood frozen, book still open in her hands. She wasn't sure whether she had stepped forward or back. The clock no longer ticked, but its echo lingered, a quiet reminder that some hours never truly pass. The storm outside had faded to a distant hum, a tired sigh brushing against the library's ancient walls. Yet inside the air was alive, charged, whispering. Eleanor sat for a long moment before noticing it, the faint rustle of pages turning somewhere far beyond her sight, though no one else had entered. She rose, hesitant, clutching her lantern. The flame trembled like a frightened heart. That's when she saw it. The shelves were moving. At first she thought it was her imagination. The tired eyes, the sleepless nights bending her sense of space. But then an entire row of books glided a few inches to the left, then stopped. Another followed, creaking on unseen hinges, until the familiar layout of the reading room had transformed into something foreign and breathing. A slow shiver worked its way through her spine. "Is someone there?" she called. Only whispers answered. They came from every direction, soft as dry leaves rubbing together. At first they were shapeless murmurs, a sound the mind could easily dismiss as wind. But then the words began to form. "Forgive me. I should have stayed. Tell her I remember the garden." The voices wove around her like smoke. Some sounded young and trembling, others weary and cracked with age. Names slipped through, fleeting, half-formed, dissolving as soon as she tried to grasp them. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She recognized one of them. A man's voice, low and tender, whispering something she hadn't heard in decades. "Elle, keep reading. You always find the light." Her lantern flickered violently. The shelves rearranged themselves again, like slower this time, more deliberate. The books shifted with the sound of sighing wood, forming narrow aisles that twisted away into the dark. It was no longer a library, it was a maze. She took a cautious step forward. Every turn revealed something new. A shelf filled with journals she didn't remember cataloging, or volumes that bore the faint scent of smoke, or titles that seemed to rewrite themselves as she watched. The Book of Regrets, Letters Never Sent, The Last Word I Said. Each spine seemed to pulse faintly when she drew near, as though aware of her presence. She reached out and brushed one with her fingertips. It felt warm, alive. A whisper bloomed from it instantly. A woman's voice this time, fragile and tearful. "I never told my daughter I was proud." Eleanor snatched her hand back. The whispering around her deepened, layer upon layer, until the sound became almost melodic. 1,000 tiny confessions humming through the air. And in that strange, mournful harmony, she began to understand. The library was not just a place of books, it was a vessel. Every person who had ever walked through its doors had left something behind. A trace of guilt, a word unspoken, a piece of love unfinished. The shelves, she realized, didn't merely hold stories, they became them. A faint light appeared ahead, a thin golden glow from the end of a narrow corridor of shifting shelves. Eleanor followed it, her lantern held close, careful not to breathe too loudly. The whispers quieted as she approached, softening into a single voice. "Do you see now, Eleanor?" She froze. The voice was unmistakable, her husband. Her knees went weak. "Robert?" The light pulsed gently in answer. "We never finished our story," the voice murmured. "It's still here, between the shelves." Tears blurred her vision. She moved closer, running her fingers along the spines of nameless books, feeling the thrum of energy beneath the paper and glue. One book in the middle of the shelf trembled slightly as if aware of her touch. Its title shimmered faintly under the lantern's glow. The Lost Chapter. She reached for it, and the shelves shuddered violently. Books tumbled from above, hitting the ground in soft, echoing thuds. Pages scattered like startled birds. The air filled with overlapping whispers, urgent and panicked now. "Not yet. She's not ready. The story isn't finished." Her heart pounded. She clutched the lantern tighter, its flame sputtering under the sudden wind. The shelves shifted again, faster, surrounding her, closing in like the slow inhale of some massive creature. She could feel their warmth, their pulse. "Robert!" she cried out. "Tell me what this is." No answer. Only the faint sound of a book opening somewhere behind her, followed by the soft click of the clock striking once. 12:03. The moment stretched, suspended between breaths. Then, from somewhere deep within the maze, came the faintest echo of her husband's voice. Quiet, almost lost in the air. "Find me in the next page." The flame dimmed, the shelves stilled, and the whispering stopped, leaving only silence and the faint rustle of a single book, still open on the floor. The corridors of the shifting library seemed endless, folding into themselves with every hesitant step Eleanor took. Each aisle she passed held whispers of a life not entirely her own, regrets she had long buried, apologies she had never spoken, secrets tucked in the margins of memory. And then she saw it. It lay upon a small pedestal at the center of a circular alcove, bathed in a single beam of golden light that filtered from a high, unseen window. The book was large, bound in deep brown leather with faint golden letters embossed on the cover. Eleanor leaned closer, heart thundering. The life of Eleanor Hart. Her name. Her life. Written before her eyes. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first pages were filled with memories she had lived. The quiet mornings with Arthur sipping tea. The sound of the wind in the wisteria tree. The laughter echoing in the kitchen when her grandson had spilled milk across the floor. Each sentence shimmered slightly as if alive, shifting subtly as her eyes moved across the lines. She flipped a page. Eleanor always walked slowly through the autumn leaves, pausing to admire the way sunlight pierced the fog. Her breath caught. She had never written these words, yet they were hers. Precise, tender, and painfully familiar. The book knew the small intricacies of her life better than she remembered. As she read, the pages seemed to write themselves. New sentences appeared almost imperceptibly, describing memories she had forgotten. A stolen kiss with Arthur in the garden, a secret promise made to a childhood friend, the soft murmur of her own voice comforting a neighbor's sorrow. Tears gathered in her eyes. The book was alive, and it knew her entirely. "Every life leaves a trail," a whisper seemed to breathe from the paper. "Every choice, every love, every loss is remembered here." Eleanor flipped through page after page, her heart swelling with both joy and ache. She could feel the library around her, not merely walls and shelves, but a living archive of souls intertwined, of moments preserved in delicate ink and memory. The pages grew warmer under her fingers as if the book recognized her touch. She reached a chapter titled "The Stormy Night," recalling the fire that had claimed Arthur's life. She paused, her hands trembling. The words appeared, describing every detail: the crackle of flames, the suffocating smoke, the desperate hope she had clung to. She swallowed hard. She had relived that night countless times in her mind, but reading it here in her own voice, yet written by some unseen hand, was different. The sorrow was sharp, yet softened by the gentle understanding the book seemed to offer. As she reached the final pages, Eleanor's breath caught. The words stopped. Blank pages stared back at her, untouched and waiting. She traced her fingertip over the empty paper. A faint warmth lingered, as if it had been expecting her. A whisper drifted through the alcove, familiar and tender. "Tonight, Eleanor, it is your story to write." Her heart leapt. The library had always guided her through memories, fragments, and reflections. But this was different. This was hers. The book had been waiting, silently, for her to add the final chapter. The events of this night, the unfolding of a life entwined with whispers, shadows, and quiet miracles. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the library beneath her fingertips, the weight of the years and love and loss pressing gently against her chest. The empty pages were not absence, but promise. A canvas of light amidst the lingering darkness. Eleanor picked up a pen from the pedestal. The lantern's flame flickered, casting golden reflections across the polished leather. Her hand hovered over the first blank line. She smiled softly, tears tracing gentle paths down her cheeks. "It begins tonight," she whispered. Outside, the fog swirled. Inside, the library waited, patient, alive, and ready to remember. And somewhere between the shifting shelves, the echo of a familiar voice hummed in quiet harmony, guiding her hand as the story began. The final pages, once empty, now held the potential of every heartbeat yet to come. Thunder rolled across the sky, low and ominous, shaking the old library as if the heavens themselves were echoing the tension within. Eleanor sat at the circular alcove, the open pages of the life of Eleanor Hart spread before her. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, streaking the glass with fleeting rivulets that distorted the golden lamplight inside. Each flash of lightning cast long, quivering shadows across the floor, the shelves, and her own trembling hands. She clutched the pen tightly, aware of the storm's rhythm, the way it matched the erratic beating of her heart. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper across the aisles, stirring the books as if they were breathing, alive with anticipation. The library itself pulsed softly around her, walls expanding and contracting like a chest inhaling, shelves shifting imperceptibly with the storm's cadence. Eleanor's gaze fell to the blank pages at the end of the book. Her hand hovered above them, frozen by the weight of choice. She could close the book now, seal it forever, and retreat into the safety of memory. The thought brought a bittersweet comfort. No more whispers, no more shadows, no more fragile encounters with the unknown. Yet something inside her stirred, a quiet insistence that the story was not yet complete. The library hummed in resonance, responding to her heartbeat. She could feel it around her, through her fingertips, the warmth of the book and the gentle sigh of shifting pages. It waited for her. The thunder rolled again, louder this time, rattling the windows. A page flipped on its own, as if impatient, and Eleanor inhaled deeply. Her chest rose and fell with the storm, the tension and fear blending with a strange, comforting intimacy. She realized she was not alone. The library had always been with her, a guardian of memory, a witness to love, loss, and hope. Her pen hovered over the first blank line. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the room, the pulse of the stories around her, the gentle presence of voices long gone but never forgotten. The storm outside became a soft accompaniment, a lullaby of wind and rain, framing the choice she had to make. Finally, she exhaled, letting the tremor of fear dissolve into resolve. "Then I write," she whispered, her hand moving with steady purpose. The words began to flow, delicate yet unwavering. The storm's roar softened, the thunder receded to a distant murmur, and the library seemed to inhale in relief. With each line she wrote, the room pulsed in harmony, the golden lamplight growing warmer, the shadows bending softly around her. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the complete arc of her life. Sorrow and joy, fear and comfort, settle into one luminous moment. And though the storm still rumbled beyond the windows, she no longer feared it. The library breathed with her. She was part of its story now, as it was part of hers. The sine wave of her emotions dipped, gentle and deep, before rising again into a fragile, enduring peace. The library had grown still after the storm, the lamps casting a soft, golden glow that filled every corner with warmth. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her pen paused over the open page, listening to the faint hum of the building around her. The book seemed to breathe gently, the air rich with the scent of aged paper and quiet memory. Then she noticed a movement in the corner of her vision. Delicate, tentative. At first she thought it was a trick of the lamplight, a shadow bending against the shelves. But as her eyes focused, she saw a small figure step forward from between the aisles. A girl. No older than 10, with wide, curious eyes that reflected the library's golden light. Her hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders, and she carried a small, worn satchel, the kind a child might treasure with unspoken importance. Eleanor's breath caught. "Hello?" she said softly. The girl smiled faintly, stepping closer. "I'm the next reader," she said, her voice calm and certain, carrying a timbre that seemed both young and ageless. "I've come to finish reading what you started, but first, you must finish your story." Eleanor felt a gentle tremor in her chest. Her pen hovered over the blank pages, hesitant. "I thought I was done," she whispered. "You're not," the girl said simply, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the pedestal. "Stories don't end alone. They wait for the one who loves them to complete them. So the next reader can rest." The library seemed to lean closer, the shelves bending slightly as if listening. Dust motes danced in the golden lamplight, forming tiny constellations around the girl. Her presence was comforting, yet impossible. A living echo of Eleanor's own youth, a reflection of the spark that had first made her fall in love with books decades ago. Eleanor's hands trembled over the pen. The blank pages waited like a breath held in the lungs of the library itself. The girl's eyes held no impatience, only quiet understanding, the same kind Eleanor had once found in a well-loved book that seemed to know her before she opened it. "Will you help me?" Eleanor asked softly. The girl nodded. "I'm already here. I'm here to listen and to remember." The old clock above chimed faintly, almost in agreement. 12 soft knocks, though the hands remained still at 12:03 a.m., echoing through the stillness like a heartbeat. Eleanor felt her own pulse synchronize, a slow, steady rhythm with the library's breathing, the girl's gentle presence, and the words waiting to spill onto the page. Tears blurred her vision. She had spent countless nights alone here, haunted by memories, whispers, and the soft echoes of her past. Now a bridge appeared between who she was, who she had been, and who would come after. She exhaled, letting her pen finally touch the paper. The story began to flow once more, rich, tender, and alive, weaving her memories with the quiet guidance of the girl at her side. The girl watched silently, eyes bright, and whispered, "Every word you write gives me a place to rest." And in that golden alcove, Eleanor felt the soft, profound truth of it. Stories were not only for the living, they were for the hearts that carried them, across time, across generations, and through the quiet, endless night. For the first time, she wrote without fear. Eleanor's pen hovered over the blank page, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The library around her was quiet, alive only with the faint rustle of pages and the gentle hum of unseen energy. Outside, the fog had returned, pressing softly against the windows like a protective veil, holding the world at bay while she completed her final chapter. She began to write. "My dearest Arthur." Her words flowed like water at first, trembling but certain. She poured into them everything she had held in her heart for decades. Love unspoken, laughter shared, grief endured, and joy remembered. She wrote to him, to herself, to the students whose lives she had touched, to anyone who had lingered in the spaces she had once occupied. Each word carried warmth, each sentence a gentle offering. The girl sat nearby, watching silently, her eyes reflecting the glow of the lamp, absorbing the rhythm of Eleanor's writing. The pen moved with care, but as Eleanor progressed, she felt an odd vibration under her fingertips, a soft pulse like a second heartbeat aligning with her own. Her handwriting began to shift. Subtly at first, the curves of letters softened in ways she didn't recognize. The loops of her L's became rounder. The slant of her words adjusted almost imperceptibly. Eleanor paused, staring at the page. The words trembled under her gaze, and then she realized the handwriting wasn't entirely hers, and I have never stopped watching over you. A shiver ran through her. The loops, the tiny, delicate curls in the script, they were Arthur's. The way he had always written love at the end of his letters. Her pen moved of its own accord, guided by another hand, blending seamlessly with her own. Tears formed, but she did not stop. She let it happen. Together again, we remember, we forgive, we love. The library seemed to lean in closer, the shelves bending slightly as if to witness the reunion. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight, tracing delicate arcs in the air like tiny galaxies celebrating this quiet miracle. Eleanor felt a warmth, a gentle pressure against her chest, and a voice familiar and tender, brushing the edges of her mind. "You are not alone," it whispered. She wrote on, the sentences flowing faster now, a soft rhythm guided by two hearts. Memories once trapped in corners of her mind poured onto the page. Mornings with tea steaming between them, the quiet comfort of shared silences, the soft click of a book closing at the end of a perfect day. Every line healed something, a regret, a loss, a fear, leaving only love and light in its place. The girl leaned closer, her breath warm and reassuring. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "They'll know. They'll all know." Eleanor's hand stilled, hovering above the page. She looked down at the ink, the blend of her letters and Arthur's, and smiled through tears. The ache that had lived in her chest for years softened, replaced by an extraordinary peaceful sorrow. She had said everything, written everything, and yet the story felt alive, ongoing, eternal. "And now, my love, I will rest. But tonight we write together." The ink shimmered faintly as though acknowledging the truth of it. Eleanor lowered her pen and exhaled, the library itself exhaling with her. A slow, tender rhythm of air and light. For the first time in decades, she felt complete. Not because the story was over, but because it had never truly been hers alone. It had always been theirs. And in the quiet corners of the library, where shadows softened against lamplight and books whispered across shelves, Eleanor knew one thing. Love endured, carried in every word, every page, every heartbeat shared across time. The girl smiled at her again, a quiet, knowing gesture. "It's time," she said. Eleanor nodded, feeling the warmth of Arthur's presence lingering in the room. She stood slowly, closing the book gently. The library seemed to sigh, a soft, forgiving sound, like the turning of a page at the end of a chapter. The pen rested on the page. The words glowed faintly, and in that golden light, Eleanor felt them. Two souls writing together once more. The library was impossibly still, the air thick with a quiet anticipation. Eleanor set her pen down, lingering over the final words of her letter, feeling the presence of both the past and the future around her. Then, without warning, a soft warmth spread across the room. She looked up. The books surrounding her were glowing. Faintly at first, then stronger, like the soft radiance of dawn stretching across a quiet town. Golden flames licked the spines, not consuming them, but lifting them gently from the shelves. The scent of warm parchment mingled with something unfamiliar, something alive. A gentle, transformative perfume that filled the library with an almost sacred hush. Eleanor's breath caught. The pages trembled as if breathing. Then, one by one, they began to lift from their bindings, spinning slowly in the golden light. Words glimmered, sentences danced, and entire chapters seemed to dissolve into the air, not as ash, but as strands of luminous energy. They swirled around her, circling like fireflies caught in a warm summer night, each beam of light carrying a whisper, a memory, a fragment of life that had once been bound to the pages. She closed her eyes. The hum began, low and steady, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. The library itself seemed to breathe with her, each pulse sending ripples through the golden flames. Fear, awe, and reverence blended into a deep, tranquil peace. Eleanor could feel it. The stories, the memories, the whispers of countless souls all merging, transforming, rising. They were no longer trapped in paper and ink. They were becoming something more. A living archive of love, loss, hope, and redemption. She reached out a hand and the light passed through her fingers like water, warm and comforting, tingling with quiet power. The girl from earlier appeared beside her, her eyes reflecting the golden brilliance. "It's happening," she whispered. "Everything becomes what it's meant to be." Eleanor nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She understood now. The quiet fire was not destruction. It was liberation. Every book, every letter, every unspoken word was returning to the essence of what it had always been. Light, memory, and the enduring heartbeat of life. The golden flames swirled faster, rising higher, yet never threatening, never scorching. They coalesced above the alcove, forming a gentle dome of shimmering warmth that bathed Eleanor and the girl in soft radiance. She could hear faint echoes of voices she had loved, her own words blending with Arthur's, whispered in perfect harmony. She took a deep breath and let it fill her completely. The pen, resting on the final page of the life of Eleanor Hart, glimmered one last time. Then it too seemed to lift, hovering briefly before settling gently back down. The hum slowed, the golden light dimmed to a gentle glow, and the books settled back onto the shelves. Not as they had been, but renewed, glowing faintly with a life of their own. Eleanor opened her eyes, feeling the warmth in her chest and the profound stillness that had descended. The library was alive but serene. She sat back, allowing the quiet fire to settle around her. The girl smiled. "Now you can rest too," she said softly. Eleanor exhaled, the tension of decades leaving her body. The library hummed like a heartbeat, steady and slow, as if the entire place were breathing with her, protective, comforting, and endlessly patient. She realized that the stories would continue in light and memory, in whispers and in hearts, even long after she left. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt truly complete. The quiet fire had not ended anything. It had transformed everything, and she was finally home. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the small New England town, brushing the rooftops with warm gold and soft pink. Autumn had settled into its final days, leaving a carpet of amber leaves along the quiet streets. The air was crisp but gentle, carrying the faint scent of earth and dew. Birds sang their tentative morning songs, a chorus that welcomed the new day with delicate insistence. Eleanor walked slowly through the familiar streets, her steps careful, savoring the soft crunch of leaves beneath her shoes. The town, still wrapped in early morning hush, seemed to breathe alongside her. Windows glimmered with reflections of the rising sun, and smoke rose lazily from chimneys, curling into the clear blue sky. It was a peaceful, ordinary morning, yet subtly transformed, as though the world itself had held its breath overnight and now exhaled in gentle rhythm. She approached the location where the library had once stood. Her heart skipped. There had been no sign of the building the night before, only quiet light and golden pages in motion. Now, in the soft clarity of morning, she saw what had replaced it. A garden. Wildflowers of every hue bloomed freely, petals glistening with dew, bending gently under the morning breeze. Paths of smooth stones wove through the blossoms, inviting wandering footsteps, encouraging pauses and slow breaths. There was no trace of the library's doors, no shelves, no lamplight. Only the quiet hum of life thriving in this space. Eleanor stepped into the garden, letting her fingers brush over the blooms. The petals were soft, almost impossibly delicate, and yet they seemed to vibrate with the same energy she had felt within the library. Each flower carried a memory, a fragment of love, a whisper of story, intangible yet profoundly real. She paused at a small stone bench at the center of the garden. Sitting there, she let the golden light wash over her, letting the warmth sink into her bones. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the kind of serenity that had once seemed elusive, a calm woven from both healing and remembrance. The echoes of voices, the whispers of books, the soft pulse of the library, they were all present here, carried gently in the sunlight, in the scent of flowers, in the quiet heartbeat of the town. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby street, blending with the chirping birds and the distant chime of a church bell. The ordinary rhythms of life continued, but Eleanor noticed them in a new way. The way a single leaf twirled in the air, the warmth of the sun on her hands, the way each breath felt full, meaningful, and free. She closed her eyes, letting herself feel it all. The peace, the gentle energy of the transformed place, and the lingering presence of the stories she had lived and shared. Each whisper of wind seemed like a promise, a reminder that what is lost is never truly gone, and that every ending carries the seeds of something new. Eleanor opened her eyes, taking in the garden one last time. The town was waking slowly around her, the sunlight stretching into every corner, dissolving shadows into soft, golden clarity. The library may have vanished, but its heart remained here, alive in the earth, the blooms, and in her own quiet, restored spirit. She inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp air and the faint perfume of wildflowers, and felt a serene certainty settle over her. Some places and some stories never truly leave us. They transform, waiting to guide, to heal, and to inspire. Just as this morning, just as this garden, waited to embrace her fully. The town hummed softly in response, peaceful and alive, and Eleanor smiled, letting herself be carried gently by the morning. The morning sun had fully risen, spilling warmth across the town and the new garden that had replaced the library. Yet somewhere beyond the quiet streets, a faint hum lingered. A memory carried on the breeze, a whisper of pages turning somewhere out of sight. At the edge of the town, in a small ivy-clad building that had once served as the post office, the librarian went about her morning tasks. She was a woman of careful habits, accustomed to the rhythm of letters, parcels, and the occasional note slipped under the door. But that day, her eyes caught something unusual resting against the doorstep. A single book. Its cover was a deep, comforting brown, etched with faint golden letters. The Library After Midnight. She picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands. Heavier than any ordinary volume, yet somehow warm, almost alive. The air around her seemed to shift, carrying a faint scent of old paper, chamomile tea, and something more ethereal, impossible to name. She opened the book. The pages glimmered softly, as if lit from within, revealing words written with a hand both familiar and extraordinary. Eleanor Hart's life unfolded within. Her quiet walks through the autumn leaves, the gentle hum of the town at dusk, the stories whispered in the golden lamplight of the library that had once been. The librarian turned the pages slowly, captivated by the way the story moved like a living thread. Eleanor's discoveries, her letters to Arthur, the golden flames of the quiet fire, the girl who had come to witness the next chapter. Each sentence pulsed with memory, hope, and the soft ache of love. Then she reached the final page. It was simple, yet profound. Some stories stay open, in the hearts that need them. The librarian set the book down on the counter and let the words sink in. Outside, the town moved gently into the day. A dog barked in the distance, leaves twirled along the sidewalks, and children laughed as they ran past the flower-laden garden that now held the spirit of the library. The ordinary world had returned, yet it carried traces of something extraordinary. A warmth, a quiet magic, a reminder that some stories do not end. They live on quietly in those who remember. A soft breeze fluttered the book's pages as if Eleanor herself had exhaled across the letters, leaving behind her final gift, the knowledge that love, memory, and stories could transcend both time and absence. The librarian smiled, a gentle understanding in her eyes. She placed a careful bookmark inside, knowing that whoever found the book next would feel the same comfort, the same healing, the same quiet awe. Some stories were never meant to be closed. They remained open, lingering in hearts and memories and whispers, patiently waiting to be discovered again. And in the town's peaceful morning, with its streets bathed in soft sunlight, that truth settled like a gentle promise across every corner, every garden path, every golden leaf. The book rested on the counter, alive in quiet anticipation, ready for the next reader. Night fell gently over the town, soft and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint perfume of wildflowers. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves drifting along the sidewalks. Where the library had once stood, a subtle golden glow appeared. Faint, steady, like the heartbeat of a hidden world. Travelers passing through the town slowed, their footsteps faltering as they noticed the light. It flickered warmly, welcoming them, but carried no shadow of fear. It was not eerie, it was gentle, comforting, a beacon in the quiet night. Some swore they saw an old woman sitting beneath the glow, her posture calm, her hands holding a book as though she were reading it aloud in silence. Her face bore a soft smile, the kind that spoke of memories lived fully, loves cherished and sorrows healed. She did not speak to anyone, yet those who glimpsed her felt an inexplicable warmth settle in their chest, a reassurance that everything would be all right. Children passing by whispered to their parents, and even the most skeptical travelers could not deny the strange peace that radiated from that spot. The glow seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm, matching the unseen heartbeat of the woman who sat reading, enveloped in golden light. Twist 7, the final quiet revelation, was that this light never went out. It did not haunt. It did not flicker into oblivion. It remained eternal and steadfast, a gentle presence that transcended time and space. The library had vanished from the physical world, transformed into something more lasting, more profound, a light of memory, love, and quiet inspiration that anyone in need could find. Eleanor's presence, whether corporeal, spiritual, or somewhere in between, lingered in that glow. Travelers, both old and young, left the town with hearts a little lighter, minds a little calmer, and a sense that somewhere, someone was always watching over the stories that mattered most. The wind whispered through the surrounding trees, carrying a faint scent of chamomile tea and aged paper. It was as if the entire town exhaled together, releasing tension, sorrow, and worry into the night. And in the center, beneath the gentle glow, the woman read on, a soft smile playing on her lips, her story complete yet continuing, intertwined with all those who had touched it. For generations to come, the light would remain, a silent guardian, a reminder that even after endings there is continuity, warmth, and reassurance. Some nights, those who passed by could swear they heard the faint turning of pages, a gentle, almost inaudible hum of life, love, and memory woven together. Eleanor's journey had ended not with a farewell, but with a transformation. The library had become eternal, the stories living on in light, whispering softly to anyone who needed comfort. The golden glow shone without pause, a beacon of peace and solace, of gentle wonder, of healing calm. And beneath it, the woman smiled, reading quietly, knowing that some lights do not burn to chase shadows. They burn to guide hearts home. The town slept under the soft, unwavering glow, cradled by the light that never faded.